The thing about pride is that it makes excellent armor right up until the moment you need to swallow it. And Wulthane, alpha of the Uruk-hai war clan, was about to choke on a lifetime's worth. His homeworld was burning. Not metaphorically, though the metaphor would have been poetic enough, but literally burning, with plasma fire raining from the sky like some cosmic tantrum. The hegemony had come calling with their usual diplomatic approach. Total annihilation. Very efficient. Terribly impolite. Standing in what remained of his command bunker, Wulthane watched the tactical display paint increasingly creative shades of doom across his territory. His warriors, what was left of them, fought with the desperate fury of cornered predators, which, let's be honest, was exactly what they were. "Alpha!" Kethwar limped into the bunker, his armor scored and smoking. "The northern perimeter has fallen. We have perhaps 6 hours before they finish what they started," Wulthane finished, his voice carrying that particular growl that made enemies reconsider their life choices. "I know." But it wasn't the approaching enemy that twisted his gut into knots. It was the soft breathing coming from the reinforced alcove behind him, where 2 small forms huddled together in sleep. His cubs, Ashka and Valmor, barely past their first molting cycle, still young enough to believe their father could fix anything. How wonderfully naive, how perfectly, heartbreakingly wrong. The irony wasn't lost on him. For generations, the Uruk-hai had prided themselves on being the apex predators of this sector. They conquered, they dominated, they took what they wanted and held it with tooth and claw. The very idea of asking for help, especially from the soft-flesh humans, would have been laughable just days ago. Funny how imminent extinction adjusts one's sense of humor. "Contact the human vessel," he said, the words tasting like acid. Kethwar's battle-scarred face went through several interesting expressions. "Alpha? The humans? But they're weak? Soft? Yes, I know what I've said about them." Wulthane's laugh held no warmth. "I've also said we were invincible. Recent events suggest my strategic assessments may require adjustment." The communication array crackled to life with enough static to wake the dead, which, considering their current situation, might not be entirely inappropriate. "This is Commander Brianna of the Earth Defense Coalition vessel Resilience," came a voice that managed to sound both professional and thoroughly unimpressed. "You're broadcasting on our emergency frequency. This better not be another territorial dispute." Wulthane stared at the communicator as if it had personally insulted his ancestors. Which, in a way, it had. Here he was, alpha of the most feared warrior clan in 3 systems, about to beg help from a species he'd dismissed as glorified scavengers. "Commander Brianna," he began, each word carefully controlled, "this is Alpha Wulthane of the Uruk-hai. I require assistance." The silence stretched long enough to be awkward. Then, "Did you just say require assistance?" The same Wulthane who told our diplomatic envoy, and I quote, that humans were soft-flesh parasites unworthy of breathing the same stellar winds. Your memory is annoyingly accurate. It's a gift. What kind of assistance are we talking about? Because if this is about joining some glorious battle, I should mention we're fresh out of glory. Budget cuts. Despite everything, Wulthane almost smiled. Almost. "Not a battle, Commander. A guardianship." Another pause. "Come again?" This was it. The moment where the great Alpha Wulthane, terror of the outer colonies, destroyer of fleets, would do something no Uruk-hai had done in living memory. He would humble himself before humans. "My cubs," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I need you to take my cubs." The change in Brianna's tone was immediate. How old? Young. Too young to fight. Too young to understand that their world is ending. He glanced toward the alcove where Ashka stirred in her sleep. They are all I have left of everything. And you want to give them to us? The soft flesh parasites? I want them to live, Wulthane said simply. Your species has a reputation for adoption, for taking in strays. We prefer refugees, but point taken. Brianna's voice had softened, just slightly. This is highly irregular. We'd need clearance from... Commander? Wulthane's interruption carried the weight of absolute desperation. I have 6 hours, maybe less. After that, there won't be anyone left to give clearance to. The tactical display chose that moment to update with fresh bad news. The hegemony forces had broken through the eastern approach. 5 hours, tops. Stand by, Brianna said. The minutes crawled past like wounded insects. Behind him, Valmore began to whimper in his sleep, a sound that cut through Wulthane's armor better than any blade. The cub was dreaming of better days, probably. Days when the sky didn't rain fire, and father's roars meant safety instead of desperation. Wulthane, Brianna's voice returned, businesslike but not unkind. We're moving to intercept. Landing Bay 2 will be prepped for your children. The relief hit him like a physical blow. You have my gratitude, Commander, and my... Save it, she cut him off. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because no child, human, Uruk-hai, or otherwise, deserves to die because adults can't figure out how to share the sandbox. Fair enough. Brutal, but fair. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and increasingly frantic fighting. The hegemony pressed closer, their plasma artillery turning what remained of his city into abstract art. Wulthane found himself in the surreal position of packing his cub's belongings while coordinating a defensive action. What does one pack when sending children to an alien species? Ashka's favorite hunting blade, too dangerous. Valmore's collection of crystal formations, too heavy. In the end, he settled on their sleeping furs and a datapad containing recordings of Uruk-hai lullabies. Pathetically inadequate. But what else was there? The human transport arrived with typical human efficiency, which is to say, exactly when they said they would, how they said they would, with no unnecessary drama. The sight of it settling into his landing bay should have been humiliating. Instead, it looked like salvation. Wulthane woke his cubs gently, a skill no warrior should need, but every father must master. They stirred with the easy trust of children who had never known true fear. Their golden eyes, so like their mother's, blinked up at him in confusion. "Father?" Ashka's voice still carried the soft burr of childhood. "Are we going somewhere?" "You are, little hunter. A journey to new hunting grounds." Valmore, always the more practical of the two, noticed the packed belongings immediately. A long journey? Very long. The human shuttle crew was waiting with admirable patience. 2 figures in environmental suits stood at the boarding ramp, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Professional, unthreatening, everything an Uruk-hai warrior was trained to distrust. "These are the humans who will care for you," Wulthane explained, kneeling to his cub's eye level. "They are different from us, smaller, quieter, but they are honorable in their way." Ashka's nose wrinkled. "They smell strange." "All aliens smell strange, cub. Remember your lessons about diversity strengthening the pack?" It was a lesson he'd never expected to test quite this personally. The goodbye was harder than dying would have been. Ashka clung to his neck with fierce determination, while Valmore tried to put on a brave face that fooled absolutely no one. Wulthane held them both, memorizing their scent, their warmth, the way they fit against his chest. "Will you come find us?" Valmore whispered. "If I can," Wulthane promised. "If the stars allow it." "We'll be good," Ashka declared with the solemnity only children could manage. "We'll make you proud. You already have, little ones. You already have." The human in the lead suit, Brianna, he assumed, approached slowly. "We'll take good care of them," she said, her voice artificially modulated through the suit's speakers. "You have my word." "See that you do," Wulthane replied, standing slowly. "They are the future of my line. Perhaps the future of my species." "No pressure there," Brianna muttered, but not unkindly. The cubs walked up the ramp with the resilience of youth, turning to wave at the top. Wulthane waved back, his heart breaking with every step they took away from him. The shuttle sealed itself and lifted off, carrying his children toward an uncertain future among aliens. As he watched the transport disappear into the smoke-filled sky, Wulthane allowed himself one moment of weakness, one quiet admission that this might be the last time he saw them alive. Then he turned back to his war. The hegemony was still coming, after all, and Alpha Wulthane had a reputation to maintain, even if there was no one left to maintain it for. 3 years later, Dr. Amara Knox was beginning to suspect that whoever first said children are resilient had never tried raising alien apex predators. The morning alarm at the Terran integration facility hadn't sounded yet, but that didn't matter. Ashka and Valmore operated on their own internal schedule, one that apparently involved waking at what humans generously called dark 30 for what they called morning exercises. From her office window, Amara watched the two adolescent Uruk-hai move through their training routine in the facility's main courtyard. What had started as simple physical conditioning 3 years ago had evolved into something that made the human military advisors take very serious notes. Ashka flowed through combat forms with liquid grace, her movements precise and economical. At 15 human years, roughly equivalent to 13 in Uruk-hai development, she'd grown into her predator heritage. Golden eyes that missed nothing, reflexes that bordered on supernatural, and a mind that absorbed tactical concepts like a sponge absorbed water. The truly unnerving part? She'd learned to smile while doing it. "Morning, Doc," Valmore called out, having somehow detected her presence despite the reinforced glass between them. His voice had deepened over the past year, taking on that characteristic Uruk-hai resonance that could make grown humans suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. Unlike his sister's focus on combat strategy, Valmore had fallen in love with human technology. The workshop he'd claimed in Sub-Basement C looked like the intersection between an alien ritual site and a very enthusiastic electronics store. He wore human-style clothing, adapted for his physique, and had somehow convinced the facility's AI to let him access technical databases that made the security team break out in nervous sweats. "Morning, you two," Amara replied through the intercom. "Sleep well?" "Sleep is for species without natural enemies," Ashka responded, executing a move that would have impressed a ballet dancer and terrified a Marine. "We were reviewing the latest tactical scenarios Commander Brianna sent over." Of course they were, because normal teenagers spent their pre-dawn hours playing video games or complaining about homework, not analyzing military strategy from a dozen different species. The cubs, though calling them cubs was becoming increasingly inaccurate, had adapted to human culture with an enthusiasm that was both heartwarming and occasionally alarming. They spoke perfect Terran standard, had mastered human social customs, and could navigate everything from diplomatic protocols to popular entertainment. they'd also somehow acquired a pack. The others are awake, Valmore announced, not looking up from whatever technological marvel he was tinkering with. Nixtal's been practicing those new engineering principles you showed him, and Luma's been working on her stealth techniques. The others. Right. What had started as a simple case of cross-species fostering had somehow evolved into something resembling a very unusual boarding school. Over the past 2 years, more alien refugees had arrived at the facility. Young ones, mostly, survivors from various conflicts, orphans from failed colonies, the displaced and the desperate. Somehow, without any official directive or even much conscious planning, Ashka and Valmore had become their leaders. "They're not like us," Ashka had explained one day, with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Different species, different strengths, but they all want the same thing: to belong somewhere. It was true. The facility now housed a dozen young aliens from 6 different species, and they all looked to the Uruk-hai siblings for guidance. Not because of fear or intimidation, the traditional Uruk-hai approach, but because of something far more dangerous: respect. Amara made her way down to the courtyard, coffee in hand and resignation in her heart. This was the part of her day she both looked forward to and dreaded: the morning briefing, where she learned exactly what kind of chaos her charges had planned for the next 24 hours. "Doc!" Luma practically materialized out of thin air, her Zilani cloaking abilities making her the facility's undisputed champion of surprise hugs. "Did you see the new simulation results? Ashka's tactical analysis was incredible. She found 17 different ways to improve the standard human assault pattern." 17? Amara raised an eyebrow at Ashka, who shrugged with entirely too much innocence. "Human military doctrine is very straightforward," the young Uruk-hai said diplomatically. "Effective for human capabilities, but it doesn't account for the advantages of mixed species operations." Mixed species operations. Right. Because that wasn't a concept that kept the Joint Chiefs awake at night. Nixtal emerged from the workshop level, his Vorthak carapace gleaming with whatever Valmore had been working on. The living armor that all Vorthak possessed had been enhanced with human technology, creating something that was equal parts biological wonder and engineering nightmare. "The new power distribution system is working perfectly," he announced, his multiple arms gesturing enthusiastically. Valmore's modifications increased efficiency by 32%. 41%, Valmore corrected absently. "I updated the quantum resonance coefficients this morning." Because of course he had. At what was essentially 14 years old, Valmore was casually revolutionizing technology that had taken human scientists decades to develop. The other young aliens gathered in the courtyard represented a cross-section of the galaxy's displaced youth. Vexa, a Threnodi, whose telepathic abilities were still developing, hung back at the edge of the group, his species' natural empathy making him acutely aware of everyone's emotional states. 3 more refugees from the outer colonies clustered together, their names still shifting as they adapted to Terran pronunciation. What struck Amara, as it had every morning for the past year, was how they moved together, not as a collection of individuals, but as a coordinated unit. Each species brought unique capabilities: Zilani stealth, Vorthak technology integration, Threnodi empathy, Uruk-hai strategic thinking, and somehow they'd learned to function as a seamless whole. "All right, everyone," she announced, settling into her role as the adult supervisor, who was increasingly sure she wasn't actually supervising anything. "What's on the agenda today?" Ashka and Valmore exchanged one of those silent communication looks that siblings perfected regardless of species. We've been thinking about the integration challenges facing multi-species colonies, Ashka began, her tone taking on the formal cadence she used when presenting ideas she knew would make adults uncomfortable. The primary issue isn't technological or logistical, Valmore continued seamlessly. It's cultural. Most species approach cooperation from a position of dominance or submission. But that's not the only way, Luma added, shimmering slightly as her excitement affected her cloaking. Humans have this concept called lateral leadership, influence through expertise and trust rather than hierarchical authority. Amara felt that familiar sensation of standing on shifting ground. And you're bringing this up because we want to run a practical demonstration, Ashka said, her golden eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded either breakthrough discoveries or spectacular disasters. A training exercise that combines our different abilities into something new. Something that could work in real combat situations, Valmore added helpfully. There it was, the part where Amara remembered that these weren't just refugee children learning to adapt to human society. They were the children of warriors, strategists, and survivors, and they'd spent 3 years absorbing everything humans could teach them about cooperation and innovation. What kind of training exercise? She asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know. Nixtal's carapace shifted color, a Vorthak expression of excitement. We've designed scenarios that require all of our capabilities working together. No single species could complete the objectives alone. It's about proving that diversity isn't just politically nice, Vexa said quietly, his telepathic sensitivity making him acutely aware of adult concerns. It's strategically superior. And there it was, the thing that made Amara simultaneously proud and terrified of what they'd accomplished here. These children hadn't just learned to coexist, they'd learned to excel through cooperation. They'd taken the best of human egalitarian ideals and combined it with their own species' natural advantages. The result was something entirely new, something that most of the galaxy's military theorists would either dismiss as impossible or classify as extremely dangerous. We've already cleared it with Commander Brianna, Ashka added, playing her trump card with perfect timing. She's sending a full tactical assessment team to observe. Of course she was, because apparently Amara's role had shifted from supervising alien children to documenting the emergence of the galaxy's first truly integrated multi-species combat unit. Fine, she sighed, knowing resistance was futile and probably counterproductive. But I want full safety protocols, complete medical standby, and if anyone gets hurt, we're all having a very long conversation about responsible decision-making. Understood, Doc, they chorused, though their grins suggested they were already planning contingencies she hadn't thought of. As they scattered to prepare for their demonstration, Amara remained in the courtyard, sipping her coffee and contemplating the beautiful complexity of unintended consequences. 3 years ago, they'd taken in 2 traumatized alien children as a humanitarian gesture. Today, those same children were casually revolutionizing interspecies military cooperation, while teaching a dozen other young aliens that family didn't require shared genetics, just shared purpose. Somewhere out there, Alpha Wulthane was probably still fighting his war, assuming he'd survived it. If he ever made it back, he was going to find that his cubs had grown up to become something unprecedented, something that took the best of what it meant to be Uruk-hai and combined it with the best of what it meant to be human. Something that might just change how the galaxy thought about cooperation, leadership, and the meaning of strength. No pressure there, she thought, echoing Brianna's words from 3 years ago. No pressure at all. The thing about ghosts is that they have terrible timing. They show up when you're finally moving on, when you've built something new and beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. They arrive precisely when you don't need the reminder of who you used to be. Wulthane materialized in the facility's main hangar like a walking nightmare from another lifetime. He hadn't announced his arrival, typical Alpha behavior, really. And the first indication anyone had of his presence was the way every alarm in the facility suddenly decided it was time for a very loud, very urgent conversation. "Unidentified Uruk-hai vessel requesting immediate docking clearance," came the frantic voice of the traffic controller. "Transmitting Alpha-class authorization codes that our system says don't exist, but also can't be denied, which is apparently a thing that can happen now." Commander Brianna's response was swift and colorfully creative. "Well, that's just fantastic. 5 years of radio silence, and he shows up during lunch. All security teams to the hangar. Dr. Knox, please collect your charges before they do something that makes the evening news." But Amara was already moving, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She'd run countless simulations of this moment in her head. Wulthane's return, the reunion, the questions about how his cubs had changed. None of those mental rehearsals had adequately prepared her for the reality. The reality was that Ashka and Valmor were currently in the middle of their demonstration for the tactical assessment team, showcasing exactly how their multi-species unit could accomplish things that would make conventional military doctrine weep quietly in a corner. The reality was that Wulthane was about to meet his children for the first time in 5 years and discover they'd become something he couldn't possibly have anticipated. The reality was that everyone was about to have a very interesting day. Ashka felt it first, that particular shift in air pressure that preceded her father's arrival. Uruk-hai had excellent senses for detecting other members of their species, especially family. Her head snapped up in the middle of explaining advanced tactical formations to a bemused human colonel. "Father," she whispered, the word carrying across the training ground like a physical force. Valmor's reaction was more dramatic. He dropped the piece of technology he'd been modifying, which hit the ground with a sound like crystalline wind chimes having an argument. "He's alive." The assembled observers, human military advisors, xenobiologists, and various facility staff, suddenly found themselves witnessing something none of their training had prepared them for. The moment when children who'd built new lives discovered their old world still existed. "Everyone, maintain positions," Ashka commanded, her voice carrying the authority she'd developed over 3 years of leadership. "This changes nothing about the demonstration." Except it changed everything about the demonstration, because the cub's carefully maintained composure was cracking around the edges. Valmor's hands shook slightly as he retrieved his device. Ashka's tactical explanations became clipped, professional, distant, the voice of someone building walls in real time. Their pack sensed the shift immediately. Luma flickered in and out of visibility, her cloaking responding to stress. Nixtal's carapace darkened to defensive colors. Vexa winced as the emotional turbulence hit his empathic senses like a psychic storm. "We need to go," Luma said quietly. "They need us." "The demonstration," one of the human observers began. "Can wait," Ashka interrupted, her golden eyes flashing with something that reminded everyone present that she was, in fact, a predator who'd been raised by humans. Family comes first. And that, right there, was the moment when Amara realized just how completely the cubs had absorbed human values. Not the submission to authority that Uruk-hai culture traditionally demanded, but the human concept that some things transcended duty. The group moved as one toward the main hangar, their diverse abilities creating a formation that flowed like water around obstacles. 3 years of working together had given them an almost telepathic coordination, except Vexa actually was telepathic, which probably helped. They arrived at the hangar just as Wulthane's ship finished its landing sequence. The vessel was scarred, battle-worn, and somehow still managed to radiate menace like a living thing. Typical Uruk-hai design philosophy. If it doesn't look like it could eat your enemies for breakfast, you're not trying hard enough. The airlock cycled with a sound like the galaxy's most intimidating doorbell. Steam vented from the seals, creating dramatic backlight for the figure that stepped through. Wulthane looked like he'd been carved from living stone, and then given several enthusiastic consultations with various implements of destruction. New scars decorated his hide, his armor bore the patina of countless battles, and his eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too much and lived to remember it all. He was also noticeably alone, which answered several questions nobody had wanted to ask. The Alpha's gaze swept the assembled crowd with predatory efficiency, cataloging threats and dismissing most of the humans present as irrelevant. Then his attention locked onto 2 familiar figures near the back of the group, and his entire world stopped making sense. Ashka stood with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to occupy space. She wore human-style clothing adapted for Uruk-hai physiology, her posture relaxed but alert. Around her, a diverse group of young aliens arranged themselves in a protective formation that wasn't quite military, wasn't quite tribal, but was definitely effective. Valmor had grown tall and lean, his natural Uruk-hai strength enhanced by human technology integrated so seamlessly it looked like evolution rather than engineering. His eyes held the bright intelligence of someone who'd spent years learning to build instead of destroy. They were his children. Unmistakably, undeniably his cubs. They were also complete strangers. "Father," Ashka said, stepping forward with the careful diplomacy of someone who'd spent 3 years learning human social customs. "Welcome home." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Home. As if this alien facility, surrounded by humans and filled with the scent of unfamiliar species, could possibly be considered home by any reasonable definition. "Cubs," Wulthane managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "You've grown." It was possibly the understatement of the millennium. They'd grown, certainly. They'd also transformed into something he couldn't categorize, couldn't quite understand, couldn't dismiss as weakness, despite everything his instincts told him. "We've learned much," Valmor said, moving to stand beside his sister. The 2 of them together radiated a quiet unity that made the hair on the back of Wulthane's neck stand up. About ourselves, about others, about what strength really means. Behind them, their pack, because that's what they were, despite the diversity that should have made cooperation impossible, watched with the patient attention of young predators evaluating a potential threat. "These are our friends," Ashka said, gesturing to the assembled aliens with casual pride. "Our family." Family! The word hit Wulthane like a physical blow. Family was blood, was species, was the ancient bonds that held Uruk-hai society together through conquest and survival. Family was not this collection of alien youngsters who looked at his cubs with the kind of loyalty that had to be earned rather than demanded. "You lead them," he observed, because tactical assessment was easier than processing the emotional complexities of the moment. "We work together," Valmor corrected gently. "Each contributing our strengths, covering for each other's weaknesses. It's more effective than traditional hierarchical command structures. More effective than traditional Uruk-hai methods, he meant. More effective than the way Wulthan had been raised, had lived, had led his warriors into battle for decades. "Show me," Wulthan said, because he was still an alpha, and demonstration was always preferable to explanation. What followed was 15 minutes of the most elegant tactical coordination Wulthan had ever witnessed. His cubs who barely reached his shoulder, commanded a multi-species unit with the kind of seamless integration that military theorists spent lifetimes trying to achieve. Ashka's strategic mind had been enhanced by human military doctrine, creating something that was neither pure Uruk-hai aggression nor pure human cooperation. She saw patterns, anticipated responses, adapted to changing circumstances with a fluidity that made Wulthan's own tactical training look rigid and predictable. Valmore's technological innovations took the best of human engineering and merged it with the natural capabilities of their allies. Nixtal's enhanced carapace, Luma's improved cloaking systems, communication devices that worked across species barriers, he'd created a technological ecosystem that amplified everyone's abilities. Together, they were devastating. Not through overwhelming force or intimidation, but through perfect coordination and mutual support. They fought like a single organism with multiple specialized components, each one essential to the whole. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was everything Wulthan had never imagined his children could become. When the demonstration ended, the hangar fell silent except for the soft hum of cooling equipment. The human observers were taking notes with the kind of frantic energy usually reserved for witnessing paradigm shifts. The tactical assessment team was already composing reports that would probably be classified at levels that didn't officially exist. "Impressive," Wulthan said finally, because it was either acknowledge their competence or spend the next hour trying to process feelings he didn't have names for. "Thank you," Ashka replied, her tone carefully neutral. "We've had excellent teachers." She gestured toward the humans present, Commander Brianna, Doctor Knox, various facility staff who'd spent 5 years helping alien children become something unprecedented. The implication was clear. His cubs had learned from humans what they never could have learned from him. "The war," Valmore asked quietly. "Is it over?" Wulthan nodded slowly. "The hegemony has been discouraged from further expansion. Our worlds are secure." "Our worlds," Ashka repeated. "And your warriors?" "Those who survived are rebuilding, slowly, carefully." He paused, studying their faces. "There is much work to be done." Another implication, equally clear, he expected them to return with him, to take their place in the traditional Uruk-hai hierarchy, to abandon this strange experiment in interspecies cooperation. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. 5 years of separation, 5 years of growth and change and adaptation, compressed into a moment of mutual evaluation. Finally, Ashika spoke. "We would like to hear about the war, about what happened after we left, about the warriors who fell and those who survived. But," Valmore added, his voice gentle but implacable, "we are not the cubs you left behind, Father. We cannot simply return to a world that no longer fits who we've become." Wulthan stared at his children, these young adults who carried themselves with quiet confidence, who commanded loyalty through respect rather than fear, who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of displacement and loss. They were right, of course. They were no longer his cubs. They were something far more dangerous. They were his legacy, evolved beyond his ability to control or even fully understand. "No," he said slowly. "I can see that you are not." The question was, what exactly were they going to do about it? The universe, it seemed, had a sense of dramatic timing that would make Hollywood directors weep with envy. The emergency klaxons started wailing exactly 36 hours after Wolthane's arrival, just long enough for everyone to settle into an awkward routine of careful conversations and mutual evaluation. Just long enough for the Alpha to begin understanding what his cubs had become. Just long enough for him to start questioning everything he thought he knew about strength and leadership. Incoming priority transmission from Sector Command, announced the facility's AI with the kind of artificial calm that meant someone, somewhere, was having a very bad day. Hegemony forces have launched a surprise offensive. Multiple systems under attack. All available assets requested for immediate deployment. Commander Brianna's response was swift and entirely unprintable. "I thought you said the war was over," she snapped at Wolthane. "It was," the Alpha replied, his expression darkening. "This is something new." The tactical display flickered to life, painting a picture of coordinated destruction across half a dozen systems. The hegemony hadn't just returned, they'd evolved. New ship designs, new weapons, new tactics that suggested they'd learned from their previous defeats. "Zaramin," Wolthane growled, recognizing the strategic patterns. "She survived." "Who's Zaramin?" Ashka asked, already analyzing the enemy formations with the kind of tactical focus that made human military advisors take notes. Hegemony war leader, brilliant strategist, absolutely ruthless. Wolthane's voice carried the weight of personal experience. "She's the one who nearly exterminated my clan 5 years ago." "And now she's back for round 2, Valmore observed, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface as he pulled up technical specifications. But with better ships, and apparently a grudge. The assembled group, human command staff, alien refugees, and one very conflicted Alpha, stared at the tactical display in various states of dismay. The scope of the offensive was staggering. Coordinated attacks on military installations, civilian colonies, trade routes. It was systematic annihilation on a scale that made the previous war look like a practice exercise. "Estimated time to reach this sector?" Brianna asked. "At current speed, 18 hours, the AI replied helpfully. "Give or take depending on how much they enjoy destroying everything in their path." 18 hours to prepare for an enemy that had already demonstrated they could shatter established military forces like glass. 18 hours to figure out how to stop a war machine that had spent 5 years planning its revenge. "The colonial defense fleets won't be enough," Wolthane said grimly. "Zaramin knows their capabilities, their tactics. She's planned for conventional resistance." "Good thing we're not exactly conventional," Ashka said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge to physics itself. Around the tactical display, minds began working with the kind of desperate creativity that emerged when survival demanded innovation. "You're thinking of volunteering," Wolthane said, studying his daughter's expression. "Your unit." "Our legion," Valmore corrected, his voice carrying pride and determination in equal measure. "And yes, this is what we've been training for." "You've been training for survival," Wolthane protested. "This is war against a superior force led by one of the most dangerous strategists in the galaxy." "Father," Ashka said, her tone taking on the patient quality of someone explaining something obvious to a particularly slow student. "You left us with humans because you thought they could keep us alive. They did better than that. They taught us how to live." She gestured to the diverse group of young aliens who'd gathered in the command center. Nixtal, with his enhanced carapace gleaming under the harsh lights. Luma flickering in and out of visibility as stress affected her cloaking. Vexa, his telepathic abilities already reaching out to coordinate their emotional states. The others, each bringing unique capabilities honed through years of cooperation. "We're not the same species fighting alongside each other," Valmore explained, his hands already working on some technological solution that would probably give human engineers nightmares. "We're something new, something that traditional tactics can't account for because it's never existed before. A multi-species combat unit operating on principles of lateral cooperation rather than hierarchical dominance," Dr. Knox added, her scientific mind clearly fascinated despite the circumstances. "Theoretically, they should be more adaptable, more resilient, more effective," Ashka finished, "because diversity isn't just politically nice, it's strategically superior." Wulthane looked around the command center, taking in the faces of humans who'd spent 5 years nurturing alien children into something unprecedented, taking in the young aliens who looked at his cubs with the kind of loyalty that couldn't be commanded, only earned, taking in his own children, who'd grown into leaders he never could have imagined. "Show me," he said finally. What followed was 2 hours of the most intensive strategic planning Wulthane had ever witnessed. His cubs didn't just analyze Zaramin's approach, they deconstructed it, identified weaknesses, developed countermeasures that used capabilities the hegemony couldn't possibly have anticipated. Ashka's strategic mind, enhanced by human military doctrine and 5 years of multi-species leadership, created tactical solutions that were neither pure Uruk-hai aggression nor pure human cooperation. They were something entirely new, adaptive, unpredictable, devastatingly effective. Valmore's technological innovations reached new levels of creative destruction. Weapons that turned enemy strengths into weaknesses. Communication systems that allowed perfect coordination across species barriers. Defensive measures that used the natural abilities of different species in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. The plan they developed was audacious, brilliant, and probably impossible. It required perfect timing, flawless execution, and trust between species that had never worked together in combat. It was also their only chance. "The Colonial Defense Fleet will engage Zaramin's forces at the asteroid belt," Ashka explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to be heard. "Standard defensive formation, exactly what she expects. While we use Luma's cloaking technology and Valmore's stealth modifications to insert our legion directly into her command structure," Valmore continued. "Hit the flagship while her attention is focused on the main battle." "Boarding action against a superior force," Wulthane mused, "tactically unsound. Boarding action by a force she's never encountered using capabilities she can't anticipate," Ashka corrected. "Nixtal's enhanced carapace can interface directly with their computer systems. Vexa's telepathy can coordinate our movements without electronic communication. Luma can get us past their sensors." "And you?" Wulthane asked. "What's your role in this suicide mission?" His daughter's smile was pure predator, but tempered with something he'd never seen in Uruk-hai expressions before. Compassion. "I do what you taught me, Father. I lead." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations, assuming there were still academies left to study it in. Zaramin's forces arrived exactly on schedule, a fleet of advanced warships that moved with the coordinated precision of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. The Colonial Defense Fleet met them at the planned coordinates, engaging in the kind of conventional space combat that military textbooks described in careful detail. It was exactly what Zaramin expected, which meant she never saw the real attack coming. The Legion, 12 young aliens from 6 different species, led by 2 Uruk-hai, who'd learned that strength came from unity rather than dominance, infiltrated the flagship like a virus entering a bloodstream. They moved through the ship's corridors with the kind of coordination that should have been impossible, each member contributing capabilities that amplified the whole. Nixtal's technical interface allowed them to turn the ship's own systems against its crew. Luma's cloaking kept them invisible until they chose to strike. Vexa's telepathy coordinated their movements with impossible precision. The others brought speed, strength, adaptability, and most importantly, the kind of desperate courage that came from fighting for something worth preserving. Ashka led from the front, her tactical mind adapting to each new challenge with fluid grace. Valmore provided technological solutions that turned enemy advantages into weaknesses. Together, they carved through the flagship's defenses like a blade made of living cooperation. The moment when they reached Zaramin's command center was almost anticlimactic. The war leader who'd terrorized half the galaxy found herself facing a group of alien children who shouldn't have been able to work together, shouldn't have been able to coordinate, shouldn't have been able to exist. "Impossible!" she snarled, her weapons trained on Ashka. Multi-species cooperation is tactically unfeasible. The communication barriers alone are only barriers if you insist on dominance-based hierarchies, Ashka replied calmly. We learned a different way. The battle for the command center lasted exactly 3 minutes. When it ended, Zaramin's forces found themselves receiving surrender orders from their own flagship, transmitted in their war leader's own voice, but carrying instructions that spoke of cooperation rather than conquest. In the aftermath, as human and alien ships worked together to process the largest military surrender in recorded history, Wulthane found himself standing in the facility's observation deck, watching his cubs coordinate refugee relief efforts with the same seamless efficiency they'd brought to combat. "They're remarkable," Commander Brianna said, joining him at the viewport. "You should be proud." "I am," Wulthane admitted, "and terrified. They've become something I never could have imagined, never could have created." "Maybe that's the point," she replied. "Maybe the best thing we can do for our children is give them the tools to become better than we ever were." Wulthane watched as Ashka organized supply distribution, while Valmore worked with human engineers to retrofit hegemony ships for humanitarian use. Around them, their legion moved with practiced coordination, each member essential to the whole. His cubs had grown into leaders who commanded through respect rather than fear, who built strength through diversity rather than dominance, who chose cooperation over conquest. They were everything the Uruk-hai had never been. They were everything the galaxy needed them to become. "The stars are vast," he said finally. "There will be other conflicts, other challenges." "There will," Brianna agreed. "Good thing they'll be ready." Wulthane nodded, watching his children, his legacy, bridge the gap between species with the same natural grace they brought to everything else. "Father," Ashka approached, her expression carrying that particular blend of respect and gentle challenge he'd come to recognize. "The hegemony prisoners are requesting to speak with you. Some of them served under you during the border conflicts." "And?" he asked, though he suspected he knew where this was heading. "They want to understand what happened here. How we accomplished something their strategists said was impossible." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Valmore thinks we could teach them. The cooperation principles, the multi-species integration protocols. You want to turn enemy soldiers into allies," Wulthane said. It wasn't a question. "We want to turn soldiers into something better," Valmore added, emerging from a huddle of human engineers with what looked like redesigned communication equipment. "The galaxy doesn't need more warriors, Father. It needs more builders." The irony wasn't lost on him. His cubs, raised by humans who'd turned enemy children into family, were now proposing to extend that same radical compassion to their defeated enemies. It was either the most naive idea he'd ever heard, or the most revolutionary. "Though stars are vast," he said finally, echoing his earlier words, "there will be other conflicts, other challenges." "There will," Ashka agreed, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight beyond the viewports. "But maybe fewer of them, if we're willing to try something different." Wulthane looked at his children, no longer cubs, no longer the traditional Uruk-hai heirs he'd once expected them to become. They were something unprecedented, something that took the fierce loyalty of their species and tempered it with human wisdom about the strength found in diversity. They were hope made manifest in fur and fang, and unshakable conviction. He'd left cubs in human care. They'd returned leading a legion of hope, all going to fight whether we want to or not. The really bad news is, our enemy doesn't believe in surrender, negotiation, or leaving survivors. Ambassador Kroon's gill slits were fluttering so rapidly they were generating small atmospheric disturbances. "And the good news?" Kat's smile widened, and for the first time since this whole diplomatic nightmare began, it looked genuinely warm instead of terrifying. "The good news, Ambassador, is that they're about to learn why you should never underestimate a species that considers asymmetric warfare and impossible odds to be recreational activities." She gathered her materials and headed toward the exit. "Briefing starts in 1 hour. Conference room Alpha. Bring coffee. It's going to be a long war." The chamber remained silent until the massive doors sealed behind her, and then every delegate began talking at once. Outside, walking toward what was definitely not going to be her last difficult conversation of the day, Commander Kat Wolf allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Humans were officially part of the galactic community now. Time to show the universe what that really meant.